This mini webinar is on narrowing down the topic, and it's brought to you by Maryland Humanities for the Teaching with Primary Sources Summer Teacher Institutes. Hi, this is Leah. For History Day and other research projects, students should narrow their topics into something manageable. A topic that's too big, like the Civil Rights Movement or World War II, can be overwhelming with too many details to include and too many primary sources to take in. A narrow topic will allow students to craft a research question that is specific and researchable. But how do we get to that narrow, manageable topic? It's a process, and it takes some preliminary research, so be sure to give students at least a week, more if possible, to make sure they've picked something that they'll be able to research. We like to use an inverted pyramid to guide students through this process, starting with a broad interest and leading down to something specific. I'll show you what each step could look like and offer some research strategies at each stage. So here we are at the broad interest stage. So we're coming back to this element of choice where students can study the things that really interest them. And it might be something outside the scope of social studies, like every year we get lots of students who want to do a science or technology topic, or it might be outside the scope of traditional academic subjects altogether, like sports or music. Everything has a history, and let the students embrace that. The research strategy that I have for this level is to see how you can take one of these broader topics and start to introduce the theme and see what comes out of it. So students can try Googling their interest plus debate or diplomacy. Now, in this case, they'll want to be mindful of the quality of sources that come up when they do this. They can also try combining interests. So an interest in women's history and in sports might arrive at a project about Title IX. And another research strategy is to browse at your local library or your school library. Look at the sections that are devoted to these topics and see what books jump out at you. And another way is to look at topic lists. So every year we have museums, historical societies, and other institutions put together lists for us that are related to this year's NHD theme. So that also might be a good place to start. Scan the list and see if your broad interest comes up anywhere. From the broad interest, we're coming down to the theme, which for this year is debate and diplomacy. So one thing that students are going to ask you is, do we need to do a project on both debate and diplomacy? Well, it doesn't need to be a 50-50 split, but most diplomatic efforts have had some controversy or debate surrounding them. And in a debate, diplomacy, or dealing with your opposition respectfully and tactfully, is what leads to a solution or a conclusion. So your project can be more focused on a historical debate, for example, but you should still show how diplomacy factored in. And in this case, in these examples, you can see the three broad interests that we've taken out: art, women's history, and the 18th century. And we've combined them with those theme terms to come to something more narrow. So art and diplomacy takes us to the jazz ambassadors of the 1950s and 60s. Women's history plus debate takes us to the Equal Rights Amendment. And the 18th century plus diplomacy takes us to the Barbary Pirates. For students who are new to research or who are younger, this level of specificity might be the stopping point for them. But for older students or those who thrive with a challenge, you may encourage them to dig deeper and find something even more specific within that topic. So at this point in the research, your students are going to want to read some secondary source overview books about these topics, encyclopedic entries, reference articles. So at this point, we do suggest that students use Wikipedia. I know that teachers have mixed feelings about whether or not to allow students to use Wikipedia, so I'll leave that up to you. We usually tell them that it's okay to start there and to use the references section, but to move on quickly, and you never want to end up there. You want to move on and see what you can gain from more reputable places. All right. So from there, we can narrow it down even further to a person, an event, or a moment, or a movement. If you're moving down to a person, you want to focus on that person's contributions because you don't want it to be a biography of them. So from the jazz ambassadors, we've moved down to Dizzy Gillespie's 1956 tour of the Middle East. From the Equal Rights Amendment, we moved on to Phyllis Schlafly's opposition movement. And from the Barbary Pirates, we moved on to the Moroccan-American Treaty of Friendship. And here, the research strategy is to find more specific secondary source books and articles about that narrowed topic. And to start thinking about things like, what are you still curious about with this topic? What moments and details will help you show the significance of this topic in the history of debate and/or diplomacy? And then also check to see what sources are available. Will you be able to find enough primary and secondary sources on that topic? Another way you can narrow it down at this point is to narrow it down by type of primary source. You can look at collections of letters, collections of photographs, or oral histories. Finally, we're at the narrowest part of the pyramid. We're at the research question. At this point in your research process, you've learned more about your topic, and you can write a research question that is specific and hopefully researchable. If you had trouble finding primary sources in your preliminary scan, you might need to move on to a more accessible topic. You won't really know what your final narrow topic will be until you do enough research and find out what sources there are to discover and how broad or narrow of a story you're able to tell. So here, the examples have turned into, how did Dizzy Gillespie's tour of the Middle East shape perceptions of America in the 1950s? How did Phyllis Schlafly mobilize women in the debate over the ERA? And what impact did the Moroccan-American Treaty of Friendship have on international trade? There likely won't just be one question that you're trying to answer. More questions are going to pop up into your mind. Write them down. Those sub-questions will help you answer your bigger question. Your main question also might shift as you learn more. That's what research really is. It's finding answers to your own questions over and over again. My research strategy here is to get into those primary sources. And you might have noticed that this inverted pyramid also refers to the research. You started with really broad research, and now you're getting down into the narrow research, the primary sources. Primary sources can be found in the online collections of archives, libraries, universities, and museums, or in-person collections if you're able to get to them. You can look for things like historical newspapers, books and essays, government documents, images, and videos. Another way to find a narrow topic is to take a look at a primary source set, like those you can find in the ThinkPort inquiry kits. The topic is already narrowed down somewhat, and there are primary sources for your student to kick off their research. These example topics are from 2 units in our U.S. Government Kits collection. And here you can see we have a kit about the ERA. So after taking a look here, your student would come up with a research question on their own to dig deeper. Can you do a local history topic? Yes, you can. Local history is great because it can lead you to a unique topic, and you have the opportunity to learn something that you didn't learn in your US or world history classes. And you might have resources to research those topics more readily available to you if you live in that area. Many national topics can be local topics if you can show the impact that it had at the local level. So for example, a big national topic was the debate over school desegregation. I can take it to the local level by talking about school desegregation in Wicomico County, Maryland. My research strategy for local history topics is to check local libraries, historical societies, and universities for things like historical local newspapers. You can also conduct your own oral history interviews if your topic is not too old. Another example of taking a national topic down to the local level, if you're looking at something like the national labor movements of the late 19th and early 20th century, uh, there were many strikes that happened during that time on the local level that can help contribute to that bigger story. For example, the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, the Baltimore Jewish Garment Workers Strike of 1892, and or the 1938 crab picker strike. All of these occurred in Maryland. But how do you show the impact for a small story? For the strikes, they all contributed to the history of labor and labor strikes in the US. But for something like the Great Baltimore Fire, and you see the inquiry kit here, it probably had a big impact on that local region, but what was the national impact? For this, you want to focus on the connections to other events around the country. How does it contribute to a larger history on urbanization? Is it part of a trend that adds up to a national story? Did it mobilize people in a way that had a bigger impact? In this case, Baltimore had to make changes to make the city safer, and that happened across the country as fires and other disasters made people aware of safety issues. With a local history topic, balance historical context between national and local. What did growing urbanization look like across the country? And what unique conditions in Baltimore led to the fire? One resource for this is NHG's YouTube video on doing a local history topic, and I'll put the link to this in the Trello card. And finally, as you get your students researching, our ThinkPort Research Learning module on digging for historical sources is a good place to start. So we'll also include the link for this. Thanks for watching and good luck narrowing down your topic.